What are the three most critical features of hydration? And then I'd like to move on to some of the more particulars about supplementation and nutrition.
3 parts. Start hydrated, maintain hydration throughout. Part 3 is hydrate post to fix it. Okay. We gave you the 1/2 ounce per pound of body weight equation. So you start the training hydrated. We gave you the 2 milliliters per kilogram / body weight divided by 30 to stay hydrated. Then we gave you the 125%. But I can actually just give you I'm giving you another list here. I'm sorry, but it is my 5-step cheater guide for optimizing hydration for performance. All right, step number 1, drink a lot of water first thing in the morning. This gets everything kickstarted, gets you going. It also saves you from having to drink a bunch of water at night, which is then going to compromise your sleep.
What's a lot?
Depending on how big you are, the general thing I'll tell people is like one of the very first things you should do throughout your day, you wake up, go to the bathroom. As you're consuming your sunlight, consume water. This is maybe chugging a full glass. It's honestly what I do. It's not the best route, but I'll just get that
16
going.
ounces?
16 ounces or so is great. It's fine. If you're larger, I'm 165 to 70 pounds, depending on what's going on, maybe a little higher sometimes. If you're 225 pounds, maybe that number is 30 ounces. Right? So you just sort of scale up and down. And the only reason I say a lot is it just depends on what you're doing. And I also should clarify, I don't really literally mean chug. Just like sips, because the faster you drink water, the faster it's going to expand blood volume. The faster it extends blood volume, the faster you get rid of it.
I don't think a lot of people know that.
Yeah, this is, maybe this is clarifying. This is also, we sort of talked about earlier, if you drink too much water, you'll dilute the system. Well, if you have a diluted system, your body's first reaction is to rid of water, to bring total blood volume down, right? Remember, if you were to go to a doctor and they looked at your total blood volume and they're like, man, you're at 5.5 liters. You're going to be like, holy crap, you're going to be put on a diuretic because you don't want to have a heart attack and have blood pressure.
I wonder if people are drinking a 16-ounce glass of water or other fluid all at once before going to sleep, and that's why they're waking up in the middle of the night.
Totally.
Given what you just said, probably a better protocol would be to sip on a glass of water in the final hour or 2 hours before sleep.
Generally, the number we say is 3 hours. In the 3 hours preceding sleep, you want to basically limit fluid intake to sipping as needed.
I think I'm going to start that tonight because I wake up generally once per night to use the bathroom, and I do drink some fluids before I go to sleep, mostly because I'm pretty thirsty at that time. Yeah. But I'm going to start sipping that water in the 3 hours heading into sleep. Yeah.
So you can actually pay attention to is, to go back, this is actually, I love doing this stuff, but if you're waking up at night and you have a very dry mouth.
Not for me.
All right. Because it can be one of two things. You might actually be dehydrated. And so then what the mistake people make is they're like, man, my mouth is so dry. I keep getting up to drink water at night. That makes you then pee too much. What that also indicates is probably your mouth breathing. So a lot of ways to fix people waking up and urinating too much at night is to tape your mouth and or use a dilator over your nose. And then what happens is you don't feel like you have a dry mouth, so you don't get up to consume any extra water throughout the night. So that actually reduces your fluid intake, so you don't have the problem of actually now having too much fluid to do it. And so there's another reason why mouth taping can really, really help. If you are having those issues and or snoring, those are not benign. That's a really, you really should get some work on those. You're not sleeping very well is the way I'll say it. It doesn't necessarily mean something life-threatening, but it's not a good thing. So you're going to run kind of your triaging things back and forth. So if you're like, I'm waking up to pee a lot, but my mouth isn't thirsty. Okay, great. Then you may actually have just a water consumption issue. If it is, my mouth is dry, but I'm actually waking up and I'm having these large urinations, then you're not actually dehydrated. You're just breathing through your mouth. If you're waking up and your mouth is dry and there's not a lot of pee there, then you might legitimately be underhydrated. So a little bit of a game you can play there.
Well, that's super informative. I think that the point alone that gulping a bunch of water all at once is going to cause you to need to excrete that water soon after is a really important point. Also for people that are going to, give a talk, or you don't want to have to get up to use the restroom, you have to sit through a long meeting. Yeah. Clearly I'm violating all these rules up until right now. I've been, I sort of follow the seagull approach to consuming fluids, just gloom, gloom in enormous volumes. I'm going to start sipping fluids instead. What are some of the other rules of hydration?
Right. So you're going to wake up, you're going to start your day and start hydrated. So you're consuming a larger percentage of your water earlier in the day. Then you get all the performance enhancing effects of water, and you don't have to worry about it compromising your sleep. So that's step number one. Also, now you're going to start your session closer to hydration. All right, great. Number two, eat mostly real whole foods. Why? Interesting. What you may or not have thought about is a huge determinant of your hydration status is your food choices. If you look at different foods, for example, most fruit, watermelon is like 95+% water, right? Fantastic source. Also, by the way, since we're here, it is not extremely high in carbohydrate. It's not extremely high in sugar. It is by percentage, but since it is almost exclusively water you're eating, it is not something that is extremely dangerous in terms of sugar. There alone, probably of all the things we've talked about in the six episodes, that comment right there will probably blow the internet to pieces, and I'll probably get hate mail for life for it. But
from people throwing
sugar,
throwing watermelons,
yeah, oh my gosh.
Well, I don't think the point is that sugar is necessarily bad. I think the point is that for most people, they're ingesting too much sugar. Most people.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Oftentimes, the people who are justifying the ingestion of sugar are exactly the kind of people that should not ingest so much sugar. So there's a little bit of a user bias.
The point here is, if you're eating whole real food, this is like, now we're kind of splitting hairs about those things. So,
so morning hydration,
eat
consume
whole real food. Yeah. Yep. Now, important point here. If you compare it to other foods, like actually meat is a very high percentage of fluid. Depending on how well or long you've cooked it, you will reduce it. Remember, you said earlier, we're 70% water, right? So if you're eating meat, you're getting actually a big chunk of water. As you cook it, of course, you lose some of that. But meat can be like, I wouldn't call it a hydrating food item, but it is not as low as something like a biscuit, which can be actually like 10% water. That's why it's like dry and dense, which doesn't mean it's bad for you, but there. If you're eating highly processed foods, almost by association, that means they've been dehydrated. Or partially, right? So you're just getting less total fluid intake. In addition, they have also been highly salted in general, right? So now we're in this position where we're underhydrated and highly salted. Bad spot. If you now switch over to mostly, again, just mostly whole real food-ish, whatever that means to you, then your hydration is going to skyrocket. You're going to have a lot. So you're eating a ton of food. In fact, it should be a large percentage of the fluid intake you have actually should be coming from your food, and you shouldn't have to be smashing water bottles after water bottle all day. In that case, though, you do need to add salt back. So we do see this a lot with people who try to make a transition from maybe a suboptimal nutritional lifestyle, and they give up a little bit of the processed food, and they come over and they start having problems because they're not actually consuming enough salt. So add that back. Easy way to do that. You can use electrolytes, and we could talk about those numbers if you want. If you just salt your food that you're making, to taste, that's going to get most people in a pretty good spot. So start hydrated, consume hydrating foods. Step number 2. Step number 3, you want to pre-hydrate. If you know you're going to do a workout session and it's going to be hot and long or one of those things, you want to look for that half a pound per body weight of ounces. So that's the number we're looking for to start our hydration session. We do that, we're pretty much taken care of. And then, like I said, adjust depending on lifestyle, humidity, and other factors like that. You can use what is called the WUT system, W-U-T. I think Bob Kennefic, who's done a ton of research in this area, if you want to read more, look up his research. It is simply weight, urine, and thirst. So in other words, check your body weight, look at your urine color, and gauge your thirst. And actually, you can use those three things, and those can significantly predict actual hydration status independent of actually measuring osmolality or anything like that. So those three metrics alone are a pretty good indicator of where you're at. So you're going to have that normal amount of water, plus or minus. If you miss that number for whatever reason, you get distracted, the number we typically tell people is like something like 400 to 500 milliliters of water in the hour preceding the training. All right. So that's like 13 to 20 ounces. So like, you're going to go work out at 3 o'clock, it's 2 o'clock, and you realize, oh man, I have not drank much water today. You don't need to go smash tons and tons and tons. Just look for something like that, call it a bottle of water, if you will. If that's not enough, if you're in a really tough spot, you can do more like 5 to 8 ounces, 15 or 20 minutes before exercise. You want to be really careful about drinking a bunch of water like in the seconds before exercise. because you're just going to feel a whole bunch of water bouncing up and down in your stomach, and nobody likes that. So 1 to 300 milliliters, 15 or so, 20 minutes before. That assumes you're in this like 185 pound range-ish. Again, if you're talking people of much larger size, you may need to increase those values accordingly. If you do all that, then you use the Galpin equation for your intra-workout hydration, and you're in a pretty good spot. What you want to consume in that is what I call sweat. What I mean by that is you don't actually want to necessarily consume water only during a workout. You want to consume something that is isoosmotic to your blood. So something that is the same concentration that you lost in your sweat. So if you've done a sweat test, you would then drink a fluid that is of the same osmolality. The short version of that, something in the neighborhood of 200 to 400 milligrams of sodium. Most electrolytes products are going to be something like that. Now I know Element is 1,000 milligrams, and it's a lot higher, but most products now that you're going to find are 250 to 400 milligrams, and they're typically in the like 2 to maybe up to 3 to 1 sodium to potassium range, right? Coconut water is actually cool. It's like basically the opposite. Like a cup of coconut water, I think, has something like 200 milligrams of sodium, but like 600 milligrams of potassium. So like total spoiler alert, but we'll use coconut water a lot for hydration. Just add a little pinch of salt because that'll bring the sodium way back up.
Yeah, one note about sodium. Obviously, people who have prehypertension or hypertension want to be careful with their sodium intake. Anytime I've suggested that people might consider ingesting more sodium, it's sort of it's like putting a target on your back. And yet, the data are pretty good, showing that if people are not getting enough sodium, their mental clarity, their focus, their mental stamina, their physical stamina really suffers. And then people argue, well, most of us are getting too much salt. That often is true for people that are eating a lot of processed foods.
And not training.
But for many people who are already sort of health conscious, who are training, they're largely consuming, or I should say they're consuming largely non-processed or minimally processed foods. And especially for folks who are not ingesting many carbohydrates and are consuming caffeine.
Totally.
A lot of people don't know that carbohydrates hold water, and that makes it sound bad. It's not necessarily that you're going to get subcutaneous swelling of your body.
No, it's recovery.
It's bringing water into your system, and it holds water. So when you drop carbohydrates, starches in particular, you urinate a lot more, and when you drink caffeine, you also urinate a lot more, as you pointed out earlier. So you start combining a few things like slightly lower carbohydrate or low carbohydrate, eating really quote unquote clean. You're not getting a lot of salt in your food, and drinking caffeine, and then exercising. And then pretty soon those numbers that come along with, a gram of sodium in your electrolyte drink are not all that outrageous. And what you find is people feel much, much better when they're getting enough sodium. Yeah. And of course, I should say that there's no reason why someone has to ingest a supplement like Element or something. There are plenty of other ways to bring sodium into your system. You can use a pinch of pink salt or Himalayan salt or sea salt or even just table salt in water, or just making sure that you're salting your food enough. And I think that there too, salt appetite and salt taste is a pretty good guide. If you taste something and it tastes really salty to you, that's an indication that either it's really salty or your salt stores are kind of tapped off. You're okay. Whereas if you're craving salt and you're thinking, gosh, I really want to put salt on this already salty thing, not necessarily, but oftentimes that means that you are salt deficient. So salt appetite is a pretty hardwired set of neural circuits and hormones, and I think we would all be wise to learn to tap into our kind of intuition about salt intake, but of course also to measure your blood pressure, et cetera.
Yeah, of course. If you think you have some sort of contraindication there, that work with a medical specialist without question. Those situations you laid out, though, are very real. A lot of people are living like that, and so it's important for those folks to understand if you are going through symptoms, fatigue, lack of focus, cognitive function, performance isn't there, then, hey, like you may be undersalted. And again, actually, a good amount of blood chemistry work can unravel that a lot, and it can sort of tell you if you're running out of whack. There are a number of folks who are extremely sensitive to sodium in terms of health risk, and that is a real thing. Again, work with your individual folks on that. I don't work with anyone for disease treatment or management at all. I've said that probably 4 times. I'll say it 6 more times. I only take people who are healthy and try to make them perform at their best possible level. So it's actually funny you mentioned that, because I was going to give people my recommendation for sodium intake in general throughout the day, and then I decided I'm not going to say that, because all it's going to do is make all the rest of the people who aren't going to come after me for the watermelon comment come after me for that. So
well,
I'll
by
save
the end
that
of today's
number.
episode, the goal is that everyone's coming after you, but also that everyone has learned something of value. You've already given us tremendous insights and actionable information on creatine and hydration.